What is Mordheim? A skirmish scale wargame released in 1999 that focuses around the grim and the dark of the Warhammer old world setting. A world where men were men, monsters were men, and Skaven wanted to wear men's skin. Also there were women, and zombies, and magic. You get it, right? Like there was everything. If that brief paragraph, however, did not immediately make you change the channel, then in the rest of this video I want to explain a little bit more in depth exactly what Mordheim is, or was maybe? This video should be a bit of a primer guide for you. A dash of lore, a pinch of mechanics, a cup of models and terrain, and a spoonful of how to play the game now, 25 years later. But before we dive into the nitty and the gritty, let's start with a whole mixing bowl full of vibes. If you want to skip my narrative weavings and jump to some concrete information, check the timestamps below. For those that are here to go on a narrative campaign with me, let's understand the first question. Does Mordheim have Riz? I use that word ironically, but also understand that the Venn diagram, like of people watching videos about Mordheim and Gen Z, is two separate circles. So Riz is short for charisma. You're welcome, thank you. Language is a terrible thing to waste. After a 6-month struggle, I finally lost not just the battle, but an old comforting friend, the concept of Warhammer 40k. Insert like a Ahsoka meme here, I don't know. And so in my destitute, dilapidated despair, I turned to darker things. In the last few months, I smashed out games of War Machine, Dead Zone, Shatterpoint, Underworld, Necromunda, and Mordheim. The death of a comforting future and my desire to create something myself led me down this path, and no doubt I will be touching on these other signposts along the way. It started with Cities of Sigmar releasing finally a faction that looks almost like it could be actually grounded in Age of Sigmar. Nice. And then that spiraled into wanting an easier game to teach new people in Underworlds, thanks to it having a grid. And I started asking various game...
Hi everybody, Andy here. Quick aside, I want to really quickly explain the background images. Why am I using the computer game instead of what I'm talking about, the tabletop game? That's because I wrote this script at the end of last year, so over 6 months ago, and I actually recorded the rest of it 4 months ago, and I'm only just releasing it now. However, since writing and then recording it, I lost my Mordheim warbands. And I was going to actually, so I was gonna like, you know, put down a whole bunch of B-roll of my warbands in my cool looking Mordheim terrain, but I can't because I lost it all. And I didn't want to just take people's stuff off of like the Facebook groups, which looks amazing by the way. You should 100% go and check out the Mordheim Facebook groups. They're stunning. The work they do there, really inspirational. So instead we get this. All right, thanks.
And I started asking various game design questions on my community tab, like market research questions, you know, what's the best skirmish game you've ever played? And among the answers, 1 or 2 people said Mordheim, a boxed game that my dad bought for me when it released, which I recall opening up thinking, oh that's cool, assembling like one card building and moving models around, playing as a kid, on the carpet, on the floor, like they were action figures. The fact Games Workshop puts on all its boxes "this is not a toy" is incredibly short-sighted in hindsight. So anyway, I had these things bubbling in the back of my mind, and I pre-ordered all the Cities of Sigmar army because it tied into an idea I had in my head about writing my next novel, whatever, and I always like to tie in all of my hobbies so that naturally like that extends to miniatures as I get too excited. But I had no intention of playing Sigmar, right? I just wanted to get away from 40k and enjoy models for the joy of them, not to play Games Workshop's terrible rule sets, right? I was playing some Underworlds and exploring that rule set now, and then I was doom scrolling Facebook when I saw an event pop up at one of my local game stores, Factorum in Warminster in the southwest of England. It was a Mordheim tournament. Now, to clarify, a tournament in a campaign game is a misnomer, right? It is really a campaign day, and I'll explain more on that later. And the organiser of it said, if anyone needs a tutorial game, let me know, and so, timing, right? If I had seen that notification a week earlier, I would have scrolled without even registering it. But now, I was primed. So I reach out and take an intro game. Let's talk preconceptions. This is a skirmish game from 25 years ago. I'm expecting it to kind of suck, right? I'm expecting it to take far too long, have clunky mechanics, and honestly just be pretty boring outside of the fact that I'm ready to enjoy things from a thematic perspective in my own head, right? My opponent brings two warbands. One was the Chaos faction, like the Possessed, made up of Warcry models, and the standard human faction made up of some 3D printed humans, all on square bases. He hands me some paper, which is apparently my warband. He tells me some very loose things, and we deploy. The game plays in phases, so all of his guys move, then shoot, then fight, essentially. And in modern design, that's just a hard no, right? This is the age of alternating activations. The chance to respond to your own failure. Feel like there's some player agency. And, we'll skip the rest of the game, I played it, whatever. I covered it in my weekly video to patrons where I cover games I played that week. So, my first game, an hour later and we're done. The game is finished. He briefly showed me how the rolling of experience and loot and upgrade for the campaign, like part of the game thing, might work, and I'm left feeling some kind of way. The first big thing to me was how long the game took. It was fast. The game done in under an hour. Oh my goodness, I had forgotten how good finishing a game in under an hour feels. We all enjoy finishing. I can't tell you why, but it's good. I often play games that are supposed to finish in an hour, but as I'm learning, they do not. Finishing in an hour is aspirational, but Mordheim did. Playing in phases and full I go you go makes games quicker. But there's no hint of modern gaming here, let's be clear on that. I had forgotten how those weapon skill and ballistic skill tables worked. You know what? Before I go off on a rant, without giving an overview, how about I give an overview? Cool. No, sorry. I want to quickly cover the lore so we've all got a bit of framing, a bit of groundwork, a nice base of foundation. Mordheim released in 1999 and was set in the fantasy old world in the year 1999, 500 years before when the game of Warhammer Fantasy Battles was taking place. A giant comet came down and destroyed the city of Mordheim, hence all the cool ruined buildings. And so now, scattered throughout the ruins are chunks of this meteorite called Weirdstone, or more correctly Warpstone. The only surviving building was the giant cathedral housed by the city Sisters of Sigmar. Everyone else entering is some form of treasure hunter hoping to gain their fortune, fame or power by finding this Weirdstone. It's all about small skirmishes over small resource points. There are no grand stakes here. Whether you live or die, the world around you neither knows nor cares. Mordheim is brutality at its height, if you will. They wanted Mordheim to be grounded and gritty. For example, the undead warband doesn't have skeletons, it has zombies. And the reason given for that is that skeletons are clearly fantastical, no matter how you view them, whereas zombies could be twisted humans in a certain light. Likewise, at the time, orcs were viewed as the light-hearted, funny race in fantasy battles, and so they wanted to not include them as they were antithetical, I'll Google that, to Mordheim's vibes. And that's about it. Ruined city, powerful treasure, grim and dark, let's go. There are two sides to Mordheim. There's the gameplay and the campaign. The gameplay rules are pretty simple. Deploy, roll for initiative. One player does everything, then the other player does everything. But the combat phase goes in initiative order. Looking through this rulebook compared to a modern rulebook like Kill Team, you can see just how loose the wording used to be and how modern rulebooks have moved towards a more mechanical and prescriptive style. That removes confusion but also increases complexity and, frankly, annoyance of reading the bloody rules. But on the flip side, there are still some rules interactions that 25 years later are still uncertain. So, swings and roundabouts. Also, this was written in a time before the concept of short actions and long actions, which are now super common in rule systems, existed. So there are some rules that in modern vernacular clearly should be simply defined as a short or a long action, but they aren't. And so then get a bunch of restrictions put on them throughout the book if you've done that action earlier in your turn, whereas they could have just said, this is a long action. Whatever. A starting warband is going to be around 10 models depending on your faction. You have heroes and henchmen. Heroes are individuals with unique equipment and access to unique skills as they gain experience, whilst henchmen are hired as groups and share experience, skills, and must all have the same equipment. The goal of each game tends to be loot some treasure. Done. There are scenarios that are just kill the other team, but that's not how you should think of the game primarily. So in the movement phase, you first decide which of your models wants to charge, and you make those charges, which is just double your movement, right? Sorry, but the game is no pre-measuring, okay? So you have to guess, which is, in my opinion, fun. I love a good guess. The randomness comes in your guessing ability of the measurement instead of a dice roll defining how far you actually manage to move. Good, thumbs up, more of that please. After charges, you then make move, run and aim actions. A normal human can move 4 inches and a run is double that. If you go up or down any terrain that is higher than 1 inch, then you have to make an initiative check to see if you manage to do it. A standard human initiative is 3, so you roll a 3 or less on a d6. Easy. Again, no alternating activations. This is full, I go, you go. So after you've moved all of your guys, you go into your shooting phase. Normal human ballistic skill is 3. In modern times, that would mean you need a 3 to hit. But lol no, Lamau even. Basically, the ballistic skill table is out of 7. Sure, fine, whatever. Your ballistic skills are modified to the base number 7, so 7 minus your skill of 3 equals 4. So with a ballistic skill of 3, you need a 4 to hit, plus additional modifiers, so -1 if you move, -1 if the enemy is over half your range, -1 if they have cover, which is just if any part of their model can't be seen from any, like from your model. And there's no 1 to always is always a fail, 6 is always a hit. It's possible to not be able to hit, right? Very old school, clunky one could say, but it not terribly so. Attacking is classic ham-fisted GW. Roll to hit, roll to wound. If it was a 6, roll for the type of critical hit, roll armor save, roll for injury. Sure. Imagine if D&D needed 5 rolls to decide one thing. No, D20, done. That's another video, that's another rant, sorry, right. Random aside, like, you know how D&D is currently really big in pop culture and lots of people love watching it on YouTube. Yes, top tier actors for the big channels, obviously, but like, here's a concept for you. You roll a single dice and something big happens because of that one number, and it's a very intuitive number. High is good, low is bad. Acting, event, reaction, back to acting. The dice rolls are fun because they force the humans to do a certain thing afterwards, but it's still all focused on the humans. Wargaming leans into a lot of like rolls, and it is ultimately not as impactful because you have to sit through a minute of rolls instead of a second of rolls. What? Let's see if I cut that rant or not. Anyway, it's also backed to the strength to toughness tables and the weapon skill comparison tables. Don't get me wrong, there's a really nice play sheet included and it's ultimately not that complicated. But every system works on different principles and it's unnecessarily complicated. So I guess it is a little bit, complicated, yeah. This is just to say, like, if the game were to be redone today, these are the systems that would be streamlined. Not that they're terrible and ruin the game. I think the game's still fun. Fun enough that I'm doing this video. These are complicated, clunky systems, but they don't ruin it. Most models will have 1 or 2 attacks at most. As you advance, you might just be able to stretch to 3 or even 4, but that's your max. And armor is very weak in this game. It's expensive and typically will be a 6+ or a 5+ save, and can be reduced either by specific weapons or even by high strength. So anyone with strength 4, which is just 1 above regular human strength, has a natural AP of 1. Strength 5 is AP 2, etc., and that stacks with the weapon. No invuln saves or anything, so it's a very, very, very lethal game. And it's cheaper and easier to get AP than it is to get armor, which is good in my opinion. The whole theme of the game is clear, and that warband clashes should be fast and lethal, which the game mechanics pull off very well. And that's the gameplay. Easy, easy peasy, lemon stew. Then in a campaign, you roll on a bunch of tables and scribble down some notes, right? And like spend some numbers and you've got yourself a stew. You earn gold and weirdstone, which you can sell or trade, okay? Then you buy stuff and items have rarity levels, or you can loot equipment and you can hire special characters, gain skills, level up, all that cool stuff. However, this is where the game defines itself, because although the gameplay is fast and fun, it's not the heart of the game. As mentioned, this is a campaign. game. Without the campaign, probably just play something else that is better at the aspect you'd rather play. Are you a competitive hardcore power gamer? Don't play Mordheim. Are you super into the narrative and want to craft your own stories? Probably play D&D. Mordheim isn't a substitute for either of those things. Right now, Mordheim is a dead game, as in it is no longer supported by Games Workshop. No models are sold, no rules are available. There is no official support for this Mordheim. This has positives and negatives. The positives are that since there are no official models for it, you can get pretty crazy with your modelling options and no one will complain. Some people will complain if you don't use square bases, but ignore that. So get some cool models from Oathmark or Frostgrave or Game of Thrones or random 3D printed stuff. No one will tell you you can't play them because there literally are not official options. I am building warbands out of Underworlds and Warcry models, and some 3D printed stuff off Etsy, right? It's essentially mini agnostic, and terrain, since the release of 3D printing, has been flooded with cool looking Mordheim style Ruined City models. Or TT Combat has MDF terrain, which is honestly pretty stunning and super cheap. Or if you're like me and just don't want the hassle, you've got Battle Systems, which is pre-printed terrain. Nice thick cardstock, goes together easily enough, and best of all, no painting required. But hey, if you're a 40k player and still have lots of Octarius terrain lying around, then you could be in an orc encampment within the city. Or if you have lots of Imperialis terrain, then homebrew some climbing rules and have at it. Again, this is not an officially supported game, and so you can do anything you want and no one will officially tell you no. Even basing. The game is designed around square bases, but you know what? Circle bases work just fine, I'm going to be honest with you. So now my models are legal in Sigmar, Warcry and Mordheim. Mini agnostic extends to base agnostic. Okay, and now let's talk about how to actually play the game in the modern age. Luckily, this is very easy. There are two sites you want to check out. First is broheim.net. This has PDF downloads of everything you could possibly need from the original rulebook and all expansions and magazine articles that ever published rules for Mordheim. Personally, I like to have physical copies of the rules when I'm learning a game, so I had mine printed off at a local copy place, but if you want a fully online and searchable rule set, then use mordheimer.net. It has all Mordheim content from official to semi-official to full-on fan-made. It even has additional content by the head of the Mordheim project, Tuomas Pirinen. I definitely said Tuomas wrong, my bad there. Since after he left Games Workshop. Unofficial, of course, but by the original designer who still interacts with the community, so official enough for most, right? So you know what the game is, the lore, the rough outline of gameplay, which models and terrain to use, and where to get all the rules you need. Which leads us to the final question. Can you actually get a game of a dead game? As always, this will be incredibly location specific. I mean, everyone says you need to play 40k if you want to be guaranteed a game wherever you go, but there are some places where they just don't play 40k. Let's look at the pros and cons of Mordheim. Firstly, it's Games Workshop. I know so many people, too many people, frankly, who are Games Workshop loyalists. I can convince them to play pretty much any game as long as it's GW. But when I tell them I have a game that is better in literally every possible way and is mini agnostic so you can still use your GW models, they refuse. So sadly, it being GW is a big positive when it comes to getting a game of it, that is. It also has a big nostalgia vibe for many in their mid-30s and up, which is, let's be honest, 99% of the wargaming community. There has not been a GW game that has replaced it is also quite important. There have been other games that do their absolute best to basically be Mordheim, but technically aren't. But again, GW loyalists won't touch those. Oh, and yes, some people are staunchly anti-GW, but they will cave and play a no longer supported GW game, so you're safe that way too. And it's by no means a dead community. Oddly, it has a larger number of people on the main Facebook group than Necromunda. Less than Necromunda on Reddit, but it's not dead, you know? If you think Necromunda's alive enough. Apparently Mordheim is too. I don't know, it's weird. Anyway, aside from that, it not being a supported game is of course generally a negative. Very few people see a game with no support, no models, no terrain, no players around them and think, let's start a group, right? So chances are good that you will need to be that launch pad for others. Any diehard gamer will have encountered this issue before with any non-GW or Asmodee game. You either start the scene or live long enough to be the scene that dies. Never mind, I don't know where I was going with that one. As I said, for me, I just hit a bunch of random branches on the fall down from 40k tree and ended up doing a Mordheim campaign day. Will I play it again? I don't know, unsure. I know there are people who can play it, but has it become anyone's primary game since then? Nah, not really, because it's a dead game. We managed to defibrillate for a few extra heartbeats, but until GW does a re-release and supports it like Necromunda, at least, I think that's kind of all Mordheim will be. A cool hobby project that leads up to a fun and fast burst of gaming at its crescendo, before falling back into obscurity until the annual reminder from others like, hey, we haven't played that for ages, let's do it. Which I think is fine, if I'm honest. Campaign games don't need to have constant play to be done properly. Play your campaign, smash out 10 games over a few weekends, and appreciate it for what it is. But as always, your mileage may vary. Maybe you have a rise and grind Mordheim gang within driving distance. Turns out there is a surprising number of them. And that, folks, is Mordheim. I hope this overview has been useful for you, and if you have any questions or tips for others, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Andy out.